War has been discussed in media since forever. Each art form has taken a crack at deciphering its intricacies. This does not exclude video games. I have seen many video games cover war, most bad, but a few pretty good. With a combination of classic survival horror games like Resident Evil and a World War I aesthetic, Jordan Mochi birthed the monster. Conscript goes very far past the war bad moral conclusion that most games do. Instead, it focuses on the grittiness. If you've never seen or heard of Conscript before, I highly recommend you check it out yourself before proceeding. I'm not personally a huge fan of survival horror, and not even of Resident Evil for that matter, but this game is seriously sick. With that out of the way, let's talk about this PTSD simulator. You play as a French soldier during the Battle of Verdun. You have been separated from your brother, and the majority of the game is trying to find him. It is almost immediately clear that this game's strong point is its immersion. It has a very unique art style that I've only seen once before, and we'll get to that later. But it really helps the colors of mud and blood blend in. It's a weird combination of pixelated, but it doesn't exactly feel like it. I'm not entirely sure the method, but I'm certain it is incredibly effective. Furthermore, its soundtrack is also very fitting, being composed by Sony Agusti. It's full of creepy sounds and droning that makes the game feel very bleak, which is wonderful in this game's case. The game plunges you into the deep end pretty quickly and forces you to learn its mechanics quickly. I think this respect for the player really helps the immersion, as it doesn't feel like the game holds your hand almost ever. One of the things that I think makes this game so great is its spacing out of items and its close quarters combat. The combat especially I can foresee being a point of criticism, but I personally adore it. In most cases, you have to make the decision on what resources to use at a certain moment. Do I spend rifle ammo on these guys, or do I use the durability of my melee weapon? I love how there's almost always a trade-off. I would be inclined to think a lot of people might not love the close quarters combat, as it's purposely very clunky. Sometimes kiting enemies feels a bit artificial and makes the German soldiers feel a little bit like zombies, but I think the game amends for this in a few ways. It might be a skill issue, but I actually did find myself getting confident when kiting enemies and getting hit quite a bit. I also think the game does a good job at keeping you grounded during combat, because you can't really roll around like a Dark Souls character, as it uses a bunch of stamina and enemies can kick you out of it. Speaking of the kick, I actually find it to be one of the most interesting parts of the combat. If an enemy decides to kick you, it's almost unavoidable and makes you lose a small amount of HP. It's funny, I actually love that it hurts you a little bit. It makes you really consider the options a little more. I also love how the combat feels really messy, with your crosshair freaking out when at full charge and the tight navigation of the trenches being a little bit claustrophobic. A thing you'll notice pretty quickly in this game is how bodies don't actually disappear. At first I thought it was really cool, as you were forced to look at the human beings you've killed rotting away on the ground, but then I read this note about the rats. This was the first time I really had the idea that this game was going to be genius. Watching the corpses of people you specifically decided to kill getting eaten by rats, and then those rats deciding to attack you, is actually genius. It's like the dead soldiers are getting revenge somehow. It's brutal and I love it. It makes you put even more effort into decision making when it comes down to killing enemies. I also love how this makes the fuel item instantly make sense. I know games like Signalis have similar mechanics, but something just feels so wrong about burning corpses on the battlefield. This kind of brings me to my next point. Conscript is a part of a few games I consider moment games. With the risk of sounding like an idiot, these types of games have a large amount of tiny memorable details and moments that just kind of stick inside your head for some reason. It's almost impossible to talk about these types of games without at least mentioning Darkwood. If you've never heard of Darkwood, don't worry, I won't spoil anything. For those who have played both, it's impossible to not see the inspiration Darkwood has had on Conscript. These games both have very specific moments that stick out. I'm just going to note a few I noticed from Conscript. I just wanted to mention Darkwood as it has a very similar art style and environmental inspections. Early in the second act of the game, you know you'll need a gas mask to progress. You eventually come across a room where you find a wounded soldier wearing a gas mask. Andre remarks that he's probably not going to make it. You are forced to take the gas mask off your comrade, ensuring his death. The room collapses and you're forced to think about what happened, justifying it in any way you can while you run away. Another moment I really liked was in the road area. Right after you reach the end of the area, a new enemy type appears. This cool elite rifleman dude. I remember just thinking that he was a buffed up rifleman so I can just shoot. I still remembered my horror as he charged me and stabbed me right in the gut. At that moment, I realized how complex this enemy actually is. My heart rate actually increased. I think this enemy is probably the most effective one, as it really requires you to think on your feet. I remember finally shooting him and watching him fall down in pain. I remember holding my knife to finally finish him off, probably because my heart was still racing. But then he cried out in pain. I left him there alone. I don't know, out of respect, fear. This was still a man. A highly skilled soldier still has a family and a life. This also got me thinking about the other Germans I killed or spared. What criteria did I base it off of? I don't know. I realized I became a creature of instinct playing this game. Moments before encountering the elite rifleman, I killed a dying soldier on the ground. It got me really disturbed, actually. I felt my stomach turn and I genuinely felt morally conflicted. Maybe I'm just a weirdo, but this revelation was very impactful for me. Speaking of the German soldiers, I love how scary they feel in combat. It's a heart-racing experience as you fight someone that feels like a monster. However, sometimes instead of dying instantly, they fall down instead, crying for help. This always broke the illusion. Just as I would get comfortable and content with the killing, this small moment of pain slaps my mirror neurons and triggers my empathy. Watching someone die on the floor by my hands always made me sad as I left the room. You can occasionally find items and ammo on corpses, useful stuff. However, instead of a needed item, you might instead find a personal belonging that they had on them. A reminder that you killed someone with a family, a brother, a life. Something that you took from them. These small details help keep the German soldiers from being mindless fodder enemies, and almost give each one of them a sense of purpose in life. There are also other small moments of brutality, like shooting a shotgun close range will send an enemy flying backwards, or shooting an explosive barrel just makes them evaporate. This brutality doesn't just stop with the German soldiers though. Littered throughout the trenches are countless French bodies, even an American volunteer. At a certain point in the game, you are told to enter the blockhouses to round up any soldiers you can. Most go without any hassle except one. Telling this man to fight starts a brawl. You are forced to leave or fight your fellow comrade. I'm very interested to hear what people did during this scene. I personally knocked him up a bit, but let him live, or so I think he lived. Not to end the video on a negative note, but I do have one small criticism: the map. The map serves as a great tool to backtrack, and I think it looks really good too. Like looking at a blood and mud-soaked piece of paper hastily tucked into a coat. My only complaint is that when you enter a new room, it kinda automatically fills out the room's layout, so I ended up subconsciously checking my map whenever I ended up entering a new room. Which, to be fair, does mean the game was doing a good enough job to make me actually care, which is good. The only change I'd make is for the map to fill out after you leave the room through a different exit, and to leave the room size ambiguous until that happens. Overall, I love this game. Its gritty atmosphere mixed with some seriously smart gameplay made for a fun mental ride. If you haven't checked it out yet, please do. I know I covered a lot, but there is still plenty of small moments that make the game great. Normally I cover character analysis specifically, so this is a bit new to me. Any criticism is welcome as I'm still learning. I hope you all have a good day and stay safe.